it was lagging pretty bad. So that's why I'm on LAN right now.
I see everyone pretty good though, so
Yeah.
Yeah, you're
We're
not
pretty
locking
good
up
for
pretty
LAN.
good.
all right.
I mean, you.
So we are live, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us, everyone, today. Here we are on Caffeine and Crusade. We are joined by two very special guests. Someone that you know pretty well from our servers. He's a Patreon member, Orion. Thank you for joining us. Also, a pretty well-known tournament player at this point. He's been climbing the ranks, doing great. It's been great to watch your journey back into 40K. And I remember when you first started, you're like, "Hey, I wanna get back into being in the tournament. I want to win as many tournaments as I can." And it's been great to watch your journey so far. And then our other guest is none other than Sascha Alexander, very well known in the Black Templar community. He's one of the top BT players in the world. So thank you so much for joining us. Especially, I know you got family in town, so we really appreciate you taking the time out today to join us for a couple hours and to hang out and talk 10th edition. There's a lot to discuss today. We got a lot of great things. Yeah, see, look, he's already got the cards. They got their notes ready. We're ready. So thanks you guys for joining us. I guess if we want to start off with, what are your impressions so far of 10th edition? I know we're really fresh into it. I've only played one game. I know David's only played one game, but definitely, I'm sure you guys have some thoughts already on it.
Sascha, you want to go? I know Sascha and I have been texting back and forth for like a week straight on 10th edition.
Yeah. Sure. Thank you for having me on. First off, this is a pleasure, and I love talking 40K and Warhammer. And I hope everyone can still understand me, even with my German accent.
Oh, please, you speak perfectly.
Um,
You speak better than we do.
Great. No, I don't think so. But well, 10th edition. Here we go. So far, I think overall good. My first impressions of it were really good. I can see why GW wanted to make the game a little bit simpler without losing itself, without doing like the Age of Sigmar treatment that we had a couple years ago for fantasy. I do think it's a bumpy start. We had a couple of games, and I think there were a couple of things that were needed to clarify the game. So I really appreciated the video that actually GW had published yesterday, I believe, with Mike Brandt and Shu, the game designer, and Mike Brandt being the global tournament organizer, just to specify a couple more things when it comes about to tournaments, which is what we're talking mostly today about. I actually was really holding back on getting too excited about any list building, just so because till I feel like I have a tournament package that I can use as a guideline. You're bouncing off ideas and maybe they stick, but you don't know exactly yet. Are we playing with one objective on the board? Are we playing with 6? Are we playing every mission? Are we not playing mission? Are we playing fixed cards? I was like, till that comes out, let's wait. And I'm actually flying to Tacoma. So in 2 weeks, I'm going to be there. So I was every day just checking the news, be like, oh my God, let's see if something is coming out. I want to get ready with what I want to take. But that was crucial. And to the game itself, so far, I also only played one game. I like it a lot. It's still the 40K we know and love. Unit selection has maybe changed a little bit, that you can only do fixed amounts of units. But honestly, how many times did it happen that you took a squad of 7? If the squad was good, you took max. If the squad wasn't good, you usually took minimum anyway. So honestly, I think that is more a detail that changed. And everything else, I like that you have the rules on each card, that every unit has a small role, and that overall maybe the game toned down a little bit, though I also feel like that's only on paper. And there's still a lot of combos that can wipe out entire units in a go. But that's it. So yeah, so far overall, very good impressions. I'm very much looking forward for the points changes they will do next week. As an event attendee of Tacoma, we got an email yesterday or 2 days ago now that said that a points drop will be coming this week. And it will also be in fact for the very first tournament that GW is running with 10th edition. And then if there is an FHQ coming out the week after, which they said is very likely. Their one will also be in effect for the tournament. But they said that FHQ that's coming out very likely in 2 weeks now, if it's coming out and if it has any changes, it will only be rule clarifications and maybe slight adjustment to rules, but no point changes or anything else of that nature. Because rules cutoff would be before that FHQ gets released. So it's kind of a bit awkward. I was like,
Yeah.
that might be weird, but yeah. So
Well,
that's what we know and
one thing
excited.
that I've been really happy with, and I mean, obviously, anytime you have a full refresh like this is, there's gonna be some bumps in the road. It's hard for them to, completely balance a game by themselves, because the community finds issues so quickly and combos so quickly that, no matter how much playtesting you do, having the entire community of 40K playtest the game, with Math Hammer and things like that, we're gonna discover things. One thing I will say is that I really appreciate how fast GW is addressing things. Like they addressed the Death Watch busted Mortal Wounds combo before the indexes, like before the pre-order of the box set was even available. So they're addressing big problems really quickly. I like that. That will help keep the game balanced and not have issues where we go months with terrible imbalance in a game or something like that. I also really appreciate that rules commentary. It was really in depth. That was like way more in depth than I was expecting, and I'm really glad that we got that because it does clarify a lot of things that we were like, I think this is how this works, but and then it's like, oh, okay, yeah, right here it says it right here, perfect. So, and also thank you GW for searchable PDFs because now I can just type in the keyword thing I'm looking for, and not have to scroll 18 pages of rules commentary or whatever. So yeah. So yeah,
All
David,
good
what about
points.
you? What about your first impressions of 10th?
Yeah, so this is I can finally say like an old man. I've been playing this game all the way since ninth edition. So I'm excited for that aspect. No, I agree with Sasha in a lot of this. I think the word that comes to mind is flexibility. 10th seems to have a lot of flexibility if they want to make some sort of adjustments.
Yeah.
I can see where they don't want the rules necessarily to be living, but they can make adjustments based on shooting. So, like on my first pass on this, I think shooting is just way overpowered. It was my style. Sasha and I play completely different styles of Black Templar. I'm more shoot Templars. He's more Black Tide. And I think going into 10th, my list became much better. And I kind of demonstrated that Friday when I had my first game. I was able to shoot him off the board completely. I think Oaths of the Moment was incredibly powerful synergy. It's like, okay, what unit do I want to die? All right, that's going to die this round because of Oaths. It's just so good. I think that shooting aspect needs to be toned down. And I know Bob and we've mentioned this going back and forth a little bit, and Alex, I think you have as well. But it's so powerful that I believe the Gladius detachment is more powerful than the Black Templar detachment because it leans into that meta so well. I know we can go back and forth on that, but because of that, I'm waiting to see what the points look like in July, next week in the end of the month, because I suspect what they could do is simply tone down the shooting via points and then elevate melee via points. And I think we'll be in a better position because right now I just don't think melee is going to be a very powerful meta for a long time. I could be wrong, but it's until they do the points adjustments, I think that's a concern for me.
Yeah, I think that's a valid concern. I mean, you've got shooting units for Marines, things like Desolators. I don't know why they thought Desolators or Desolation Squads or whatever they're called at 120 points was a good idea. Like that's just nuts. So I'm expecting them
Yeah.
to get a pretty big points hike. I'm expecting a pretty big nerf to indirect. Might even go back to something like ninth edition um, you know, because indirect is really powerful right now, especially indirect blast weapons. Blast got much better, which it needed to get better. It was pretty terrible. It was pretty much only a detriment, to vehicles and things like that. Now it actually provides a decent bonus because half the time it was like, cool, minimum 3 shots. oh, I'm rolling, a D3 plus D3 plus 3. Cool. It doesn't help me, right? Or 3D3. It doesn't help me. So, I think we're gonna see they've said that in the most recent article about it. They're gonna address fate dice. They're gonna address indirect weapons. So,
Yeah.
there's
Towering.
yeah,
Yeah,
towering. It's
towering.
just goes back to, what I was saying earlier. They are now very quick to identify and address those issues. And with digital format, hopefully they keep this digital format. I would even pay for digital format. I've been wanting, they used to do digital back in the day. If they come out with codexes and they want us to pay for them, fine. I'm happy to buy a hard copy because I like to have a hard copy for the armies I play. But give us a digital format too. I'll even pay for it or pay a subscription or something. If you want money, that's fine. But digital is so much easier to update because then they can make changes to the document itself, and you don't have to have a FAQ and your codex, right? So I definitely don't disagree that shooting is pretty powerful right now, especially certain armies like Eldar, Space Marines, that kind of thing.
Yep.
I think there's a good point we can maybe ask. Do we think that shooting overall currently is better than close combat because of the rules? Or do we think shooting is better right now because of some units points cost? Because I think that was a very interesting point David mentioned, that I think by changing some of the overperforming shooting units, the game could be brought back into a balance here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's the points.
Yeah, me too.
A great example is the Terminator Assault Squad. Sasha, we were talking about that. They reduce the damage output pretty dramatically, but they're also 200 points, and you
Yeah,
feel almost obligated to bring some sort of leader with them. So you're talking 255 at a minimum, up to just under not 300. So I can either spend 300 points on a Terminator Assault Squad that's not doing as much damage as it did in ninth, or I can spend that many points on a Lancer and a Reaper.
yeah, yeah. That's true. I will say I don't think Terminator's points cost is unjustified. They are way more durable than they were with a native 4-up invul. The assault guys with an extra wound. I mean, they're very good, tough 5. So I don't think that they're too expensive. But you're right, they did take a significant decrease in damage output. Um, so and that's partially because toughness went up, so strength 8 is no longer like the golden number. Um,
Yeah. And
but
not only that, it's also only 2 damage on the hammer instead of
Yep.
3.
yep,
Yes, it does devastating wounds, but that is a huge difference, 2 or 3 damage, about
yeah,
all when there's so many 3 wound or like tanks now and monsters just got so many wounds.
yeah,
And then also the reduction of AP, right? Like not being able to really access AP3 anymore on those hammers hurts. So like a lot of things just even save on 3s against hammers
yeah.
and other Space Marine armies. So I think that is too. So yeah.
Well, a point in our favor for our detachment is we have Crusader's Wrath, where we can make those hammers AP3, which is definitely helpful. So
We shall keep a tally 1-0 for
Yeah.
the Crusaders detachment of a Gladius.
yeah,
One thing
Yes.
I will say is I did run a full brick 320 points of Crusader squads with Grimaldus, and it gave me a kind of a preview of how powerful melee could be, because I will say from 9th to 10th we're faster, considerably faster. Being able to scout, move the models up the board, being able to advance and charge. There's a lot of synergies that can get them closer to objectives more quickly, and I can imagine those scenarios where you're able to move these melee units considerably faster across the board. So again, with some tweaking there, I think melee can be in a very powerful form, especially with Black Templars.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
going
I
to kind
agree.
of touch in on this. I think it's a point-based thing because everything that you see that really has the most powerful shooting, at least for us, and in general across the game, I've had 5 games. It's very, very cheap for the shooting that you get. So honestly, I think what we're going to be needing to see is a point increase rather than a point decrease on our close combat. I think the close combat is pretty fairly costed across the board. from the most part, but those shooting tools across the board need to go up in points. I mean, you get Desolators you brought up as a good one. Hellblasters are reasonably cheap. Eradicators not quite as good as they were, but 95
That's
points.
good.
Yeah, still dirt cheap.
So
Yeah.
you see all these
Which
really good
again-
units that are
And-
like very cheap.
And I mean, if you look at the our two unique infantry units, both of them are incredibly good in melee. I mean, Crusaders have 5 chainsword attacks. Like, okay.
Which is
did
a
it-
mistake. We all know that.
Yeah.
That's going down to 4.
I did a
I
double
hope
check.
not.
So I'm in my game and I advance and charge an infiltrator squad and I get most of these guys in, and then so I'm like, all right, let me bring up the data sheet, same amount of attacks I'm doing. I only have like 10 guys 11 guys in here. Okay, maybe I'm not gonna be able to get as many attacks as I wanted. So 11 chainsaws, and then I look at the data sheet, I'm like, oh, that's 55 attacks. He's like, wait, what? And I'm like, yeah, these have 5. So I mean, I get Fire's Devotion built in and the charge bonus built in from 9th now.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, Sword Brethren are ridiculous. Like, an extra attack or extra damage. Like, they are just absolute blenders now, which is awesome. And then you add in the third wound, the extra durability from the third wound, and it really, both of our melee units, and they're both very well costed. So I don't think either one of those units is look at you. Either one of those units is really. Has points issues. I think they're perfectly fine where they are. It's just a matter of those shooting units, like Bob said. I think just those really top tier shooting units are just too cheap right now, because it's not like their shooting is ridiculously good. I mean, it's good, but the fact that you can put multiple of those units easily in a list with a bunch of other stuff is where it comes into play.
Correct.
Yeah.
And if we talk about Sword Brethren for a second here, I think their biggest value is not even the unit itself, is that their attack and more importantly, the damage buff goes over to characters.
Yes.
So if you put a captain in here, you put a lieutenant in here, and you put, the apothecary is just here for the fun, but even the apothecary goes to damage too with his no AP attacks. But the captain really is where the money is, because that one time you use the finest hour, his death wounds on his mastercrafted power weapon or whatever he would have is 3 damage. And if the target has oath with 9 attacks, on average you get 2. If you get a bit spiky, you get 3 6s, right? That's 6 to 9 mortal wounds just from him, plus the hammers in the unit that have death wounds.
Yep.
Like Sword Brethren with the captain just on their own, with when he uses finest hour, they put out on average 15 wounds. So like not maybe 50, let's say 10 to 15 based on how
Yeah.
spicy your 6s get. The 6 attacks on the hammers that are 3 damage apiece also instead of 2. And then the 9 attacks on your captain with 3 damage, whatever weapon he has, that is huge.
And I
Yeah.
think over the long term health of the game itself, when we're talking about this interaction with close combat and shooting, one of the things I think the points are going to help out with adjustment with is shooting has to interact with the terrain and cover that's out there. And if you're looking at the tournament packet in the way that they have their suggested terrain layouts, there's a lot of cover on those boards.
Mhm.
And I think that's a good thing for the game or overall.
It's a lot better than their 9th boards.
Yeah. So you're almost getting, and I see a comment that's talking about this, but you're almost seeing -1 to your AP pretty much overall, just because of the increase in your cover save from the shooting. So if we balance that with the points, get those points kind of adjusted, touched up a little bit, I think that close combat is going to come into its own, because you're not going to see the reduction in your AP from cover that is going to be all over the place in your games.
And cover's a lot
100%
more
agree.
generous too.
Yeah.
You basically get cover from a lot of things. Like you can get cover from battlefield debris just by, I can't fully see your model. It's like, so, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I agree. And in fact, the other thing that they adjusted that was a very powerful synergy for my playstyle was strategic reserve. I was talking to Alex before the call. He said, "Hey, I brought 3 tanks and they got wiped out." I'm like, why did you put them in strategic reserve? And
That's
I,
what
I
I
was,
said.
it was a very powerful strategy. In fact, that was part of my strategy for Atlantic City was to leverage strategic reserve above almost any other rule. I was able to have at least 2 or 3 tanks in strategic reserve in a tornado. Now I can only do 25%, but that said, it is still a very powerful thing to keep in your back pocket for the amount of terrain that's on the board. And that came into my game on Friday was, I put a Lancer and a Reaper in strategic reserve, and no matter how much cover they had, I drew them out and then put stuff on the side of the board on turn 2 and 3, and it creates some open firing lanes that way. But that's been toned down too.
Yeah. Oh, I know why I didn't put anything in strategic reserves because we pulled the mission card that you have to roll for it, like fifth edition. I was like,
Oh.
I'm not dealing with that. I don't want to deal with that. It was like turn 3 before his Raveners showed up, so I was like, no, it's okay. So yeah. We've got a question from Grand Enforcer. It says, could you please explain more in depth the finest hour mechanic with Sword Brethren? So, Sword Brethren, they have an ability on their data sheet that say models in this unit can choose +1 damage or +1 attack, basically, at the start of each fight phase. So when a character joins a unit, they become part of that unit for all rules purposes. So when it says models in this unit, it applies to that character as well. So that's where he's getting the extra damage from, is from that. And Finest Hour gives him 3 extra attacks and gives his attacks devastating wounds for that 1 turn. So that means he rolls a 6. His Mastercrafted Power Sword, which was normally damage 2, is now damage 3, and you're hitting, on a 6 to wound, they become mortal wounds instead. So that's how that works. Um, the only thing that there's only a couple rules that don't interact that way, and those are like the core rules like Deep Strike and Scouts and things like that. If you put a character in a unit that can Deep Strike and he can't Deep Strike, then the unit can't Deep Strike because it has to be every model in that unit that has that. So same thing with Scouts. So Bob and I were actually we just recorded a video on Friday about Primaris Crusader squads, and in it you'll see we'll talk about that interaction of Crusader squads, when it's worth it to add a character and lose Scout versus just running them by themselves and getting that extra free move, up the board. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, the rules clarification that they did basically said with scouts is you take the lowest common denominator for scouts.
Yeah.
So the characters have 0 if you, for example, if you wanted to use like Armaldus with them, so they would get scout 0. So
Yeah.
But it's an important, just as Sasha said there, it's an important point. If you don't take anything away from this call, look at your data sheets and see what synergies are available where you can basically complement a unit with
Yeah.
those abilities, because I think that's a powerful thing that people are going to overlook, or they're just not going to put a lot of time and effort into really digging into these data sheets and say, hey, if I
That's
add
what we're
this to
here
this
for.
unit, taking the time to dig in to find out where those magic synergies are. I think that's where you're going to see the meta start to really show its face, and then months coming where somebody's going to come up with some really crazy idea where they say, "Oh, I didn't know I could put this ability with this unit
Yeah.
by adding this."
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And then that's where like guys like Helbrecht with his critical hits on a 5+ really synergizes with like a big blob of units of models, like a big blob of Crusaders or Primaris Sword Brethren or something like that. Somebody with a lot of attacks that you can really make use of that critical hit with our vows that get you extra things on a critical hit. So those kind of synergies is there's a lot of that in 10th edition, and I really like that where you can kind of like combo things together, like um, another thing like land speeders and blast weapons, you know they synergize together, which is pretty cool. So then you can pair that land speeder with your vindicator, your whirlwind, your redemptor, those kind of things, and have those units synergize across the battlefield. That's something I think they've done really well with 10th edition, is making sure that each unit has something unique to bring to the table. And you know, sometimes it's like, oh, I wish this unit had this ability too, but you know, they've still done a great job of making at least every unit have some kind of purpose or have some kind of ability that makes it unique to that unit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier I've gotten about 5 games in, and I really, just like Ryan said here, I want to really reiterate this is the addition of synergies. So if you're just taking units like willy nilly in your list, you're not going to do well. You need to have those synergies in your list. You have to use those characters wisely. Uh, use your stratagems to make those data sheets hum. Really, that's how you win in 10th edition, at least in this initial index stage.
Yeah. Shall we maybe talk a little bit about our favorite combos that we have been digging out?
Yeah.
I mean, David already spoke about it. Him and I have very different play styles, and David is leaning usually more into the tank aspect of Templar. And I had been playing for the past couple of months. I mean, since Wargig got free for Templar, more like the Black Horde style. But yeah, if David, why don't you start? And we can like each talk about one combo maybe that so far we have been, at least on paper, I mean, we only got one game that we think might make sense, and maybe some of our listeners haven't heard about yet. And like the finest hour combo with Sword Brethren maybe gives an idea to someone.
Yeah.
Sure, I'll go into a softball here because it goes into the note that I said, hey, I think Gladius is a better detachment for Black Templar. And the reason why, the reason why is because Desolation Marines with an Apothecary with Bolter Discipline, you do Oath a Moment on something. It's like, all right, I did it to a guy, and it was, and I says, all right, I got my 6s here. Here's all my hits. I'm gonna reroll all my hits. I'm gonna start fishing for 6s here. So I think that was the ability to fish for 6s on the create the lethal hits combination on the Desolation Marines is just a very powerful, especially when you're shooting strength 4, which normally you're like, oh, I don't really want to have to roll that wound roll because I'm not going to get much of a result. All right, cool. I'm gonna fish for 6s. Fishing for 6s was one of my favorite strategies in 9th, and here it is again in shooting form in a very dangerous synergy. It's one of my favorites right out of the gate.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's
If I
fair.
may add to your synergy, I mean, we all know Desolation Marines right now are pretty broken. Wink here. But yeah, for anyone who, what David was saying right now, that's a big mechanic that rolled over from 9th to 10th is fishing for 6s or 5s, so for a result that you need. And I think what makes this combo even better is if you take a unit of Incursors. I think they're only 95 points or 90, between 90 and 100 points.
They're 90. Yeah.
And if they hit 90, there we go. And if they hit a unit, everything shooting that unit gets +1 to hit. So now, if your Desolation Marines shoot that unit, they get a better, they hit on 2s usually then. So now if you fish for 6s, your conversion rate at rerolling is better than if you were just rolling on 3s. And then on top, if you want that extra, yeah, exactly, you have less chance to fail. So your conversion rate of getting more 6s and then even getting more hits is higher. And then you can even throw the Storm Speeder.
Yeah,
There's the
Storm.
Thunderstrike, which is the last, the one that has all the anti-infantry guns.
The Hail
Strike.
Hail Strike.
Hail Strike.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yep.
Can make those indirect shots even better because he himself has Deep Strike. So in a turn, we're like, right, I really got to kill something. You can Deep Strike him in and then make all the indirect fire from your Desolation Marines have an extra point of AP.
Yep, definitely. That's pretty gross. Yeah. So Sascha, what about you? What's your favorite combo so far?
I'm going back to one that I've been bouncing off with David in 9th, actually. I think the Phobos Captain, based on what style of close combat you want to play, can be a huge asset to any close combat Templar list, because his Warlord trait or his ability now got better finally, because now you can redeploy up to 3 Phobos units after you know who goes first. So what it lets you do is, which I think most of my Black Templar lists will have always, maybe an Incursor unit, probably an Infiltrator unit. I still think there's a lot of units that are very important for preventing Deep Strike. And if worse comes to worse, you just take 3 Sniper Scout Squad, which I think are one of the best units in the Space Marine Codex right now, with the rule that they can't be shot from out of 12. And you can deploy those units very aggressively. with a Phobos captain, so you take the little extra tax of having a Phobos captain. If you go first, you have now 3 units that can move and charge something, tying up some key elements of your opponent, or even just move blocking some parts of your opponent, which move blocking has become harder, but it's still possible. And that allows the rest of your army to move forward, take better positions in the center of the board, and gives you the ability to take control of the board, which I think in this edition, more than anything, the Dead Man's Land is more important than before. There were a lot of missions in 9th edition where you could kind of stay in your deployment zone or close to your deployment zone for a turn or two, and then come out turn 3, 4. So far from the theory games I've been playing and the one game I did play, it looks like No Man's Land is much more important. And by being able to have a Phobos captain, and maybe if you go first to pressure your opponent, and if you go second to put your units again back and cover, it gives you the option to, starting turn 1, take control of the game if you go first, and be in a better defensive position if you go second. And I think that's his key value that adds value to most Black Templar lists, actually. I mean, Space Marines in general, but all of you looking for a Black Templar close combat style, I think he is great. Even if you just take some reavers that aren't amazing, but they can hold some units back and force your opponent to take some battleship tests, maybe, and then go from there.
It was the first major change. As soon as you always get done with the game and you're like, okay, I'm going to take my list. What do I want to adjust? It was actually the first thing I adjusted as soon as my game was over. Because I did run away with a score. And just as Sasha said, it's because I controlled the center of the board so quickly, No Man's Land specifically. But I was running tactical missions and I had realized early on, I wish I had scouts and scout snipers. I really wish I had the Phobos captain and even lieutenant. Because I was drawing missions out of the tactical deck that also required some more board control even in the back line. And again, hoping that I had something to center, and I didn't. I was like, oh, these scouts are only 75 points. That warlord trait is now just a simple ability. I think it's a very powerful thing. It's something I added. I added 2 scout snipers and a scout crew immediately to my list after that first game.
Yeah, so and something to note too is Invictors are now Phobos. So you could, if you have that, and you take and Invictors are really good now. We just released a video talking about the biggest winners and the biggest losers of 10th edition, and Invictors were on our biggest winners list. They got a lot better, in my opinion. They're for some reason their Invictor melee fist is better than every other Dreadnought. Like, I don't know, it's strength 14. Okay. I mean, tank shock incoming with that one. 16 dice, sure. But they are Phobos and they have scout 8 inches. They lost the concealed positions, but that's okay. They have the scout, so they're still really fast. They can still really get up that board. You could deploy them really aggressively if you have 1 or 2 or even 3 or whatever, really aggressively on the line. And then if you don't get first turn, you just pull them back and put them behind terrain so they don't get shot off the board. So another way to utilize that Phobos captain, which is a great call out. So I've got one that I really like so far, and we're gonna hopefully, get another one in the Righteous Crusaders slot here. Is the is and you can kind of do this without in Gladius, but I think it works a little bit better because I don't think Gladius has a way to increase AP and melee. Correct me if I'm wrong. They might have a strat, but you have to be in the assault doctrine or something. I can't remember. Um, so maybe one of you guys can check that while I'm talking. But you take a 20-man block of Crusaders, and you put Grimaldus with them. And in melee, Grimaldus can give them +1 AP. And then you add Righteous Crusaders on that. And then if you're in Suffer Not, or you add Suffer Not to them via Fervent Acclamation, now they are auto wounding on 6s. Grimaldus gives them full rerolls, and their chainswords are AP3. And a 20-man block of Crusaders has 70 chainsword attacks. so you could pretty much bring down a knight. I did some napkin math, and I just did the chainswords, and it did like 18 wounds or something like that to a knight in melee, just off the auto wounds. Like, I mean, it's nuts. Like, you can, if you get all, and it's not that hard. It wouldn't be that hard to get all 20 in, assuming they all make it, of course, right? We're here with napkin math. Okay, well, if I did this, right? Um, so, theoretically, if I got them all in, this is how much damage I could do. But still really potent combo. That's only available in that because you got to be able to use Fervent Acclamation potentially, and you got to use Righteous Crusaders. And but yeah, it's I like that combo. I think it's hilarious to have AP3 chainswords.
There's a similar
So
comp. So I'm going to argue for Gladius here. There's a similar combo. And the CP cost is 2 instead of 1, but what you get is you still get the AP as long as you're in Assault Doctrine, but you also get +1 to wound. So would that change your math there? What do you think about that?
I mean, if you're in stuff or not, you get +1 strength. So, I mean, obviously against a knight, that's irrelevant. But against not quite as tough targets, that +1 to strength could matter. Could make you going from wounding on 5s to or 4s, or potentially more than likely, if you're trying to hit something that's really durable, it'd go from 6s to 5s, which is essentially the same thing. So,
The
so yeah.
+1 to wound is just doesn't matter.
That's true. That's true. It does cost an extra CP though. So
So we'll do this on that one.
yeah, well, all right.
It's a push.
It's a push.
Relatively even. Relatively even.
Yeah.
I want to hear. I appreciate the push because I want to go into a segue pun, but I do want to hear Bob your synergy idea. But I don't. Before we lose it, the devout push versus squad tactics. Let's talk about that sometime after we get Bob's answer for synergy.
Good, because while Bob's talking, I'm gonna look up what squad tactics does because I can't remember.
All right, mine's going to be a little bit more simplistic than yours is. So those are good examples. But one of the combos that I've been using in my lists is the combination of. I have a list that I kind of made a meme in the Discord when the points came out, and it was kind of like, I'm more of on the Orion side. I like having some shooting in my lists, and with a CC Counterpunch. So I initially, there was a joke that was going around the Discord, and I designed a list called "Riding Dirty," and it was a kind of a play off of my childhood. I lived in a more rough neighborhood. There was gangs and things of that nature, so I had impulsors with like Hellblasters and Inferno squads, and I just kind of like was riding dirty through the neighborhood. Yep, exactly. So that was kind of the meme, but I did actually make a competitive list out of the. Now I don't now have the Impulsors and Furnace on it, but what I did do was I took my Primaris Brethren in my Impulsor, so either 5-man squads, because in my opinion, based on my testing, they trade up very well. I typically played MSU trade up lists, so even at that 5-man, they have the ability to take out whatever you need. But I put the Primaris company champion with them. So the ability to get the additional +1 to your advances and your charges is huge. And the ability to get free heroic interventions is massively huge because they're going to kill whatever they charge after the one attack. So then they're going to be right there in the open, potentially maybe in cover on. So that puts them into a little bit of a precarious situation, right? Now there's a lot of units that are a lot of people that will try and shoot them, but there's a ton of because you're going to be in no man's land or possibly even in your opponent's side of the board with these guys with the massive mobility that you get from the impulsor. So you may see some movement right near close to them, and that heroic intervention into a unit is for free has been really critical in my
It's
games.
2 CP. It costs 2 CP to do that normally. So the fact that you get to do it for free is pretty awesome.
And it's a 55-point character who can use precision to kill characters.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah, and to your point, they may get shot during that turn, but leading into our next segue, you can just devout push them and and get them even closer to where they need to go. So see how we did that? It's almost like we planned this. So yeah, like I do like that combo there, Bob. And while they won't make as much use as the with the advance, the bonus to advance. If you do need to get them somewhere, you're going to be a little more reliable in that. But the bonus to charge is awesome. There are very few bonuses to charge in ninth edition. We lost rerolls across the board for charging, so anytime we can get increased odds of getting in, it's going to be really important. It's going to help us save those command rerolls when we really need to make that charge. So, um,
Yeah,
Yes.
so
I would like to add here, there was the other combo I was struggling with. I wasn't sure which one to bring up because this is a multiple combo. I think actually one of the combining something David said earlier, strategic reserve, the company champion, and the free heroic intervention. One of the units that I will plan on running is basically always bring a company champion, but then have him, even if you just take him with some assault intercessors. It's a cheap unit. They get full rerolls if they fight on an objective. And it's a unit that's cheap enough that you can keep in strategic reserve. And when they come in, it's an 8-inch charge for the +1 that you get from the company champion. You can spend a CP to reroll it, so you have a 60% odds to make it into combat with them. But if you don't, you're still in a really good position, because what you then do, unless the unit gets wiped, which assault interceptors aren't usually people's first priority, and if they just shoot them a little bit, you can then basically move forward with Devout push, and then you have a 6-inch heroic, which still covers the majority of the objective. So quite often, if there are objectives on the side of the board, what I intend to do with this squad, it's just a unit for 135 points, keep them in strategic, bring them in close to an objective, try to charge and usually kill what's on the objective unless it's a tough unit. And if not, you can still make it onto the objective in your opponent's turn or threaten that objective in your opponent's turn by moving onto the board, getting shot, not dying, devout push, and then if you can still heroic intervention onto it if the opponent is on it. So I think that's a cheap combo that maybe not always will work. Maybe it looks better on paper than it actually is, but I think it's a great little tool you can have in the side of your pocket.
well, and just to add on to that, note that heroic intervention is now a charge move, so you are rolling for it, but that company champion gives them the +1. So you're within 6, you're just 6 inches away exactly or whatnot. Then you're gonna have a 5-inch or 4-inch charge, which is really makeable. So yeah, so it's that's an important thing to note, is that he buffs that as well on top of everything else he does. So
all right. So I see a comment in here that I kind of want to touch on because
sure.
we really, in our last recorded video that just got put out, made comment about it. But what do you think about Inceptors, specifically Meteoric Descent?
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about this.
I love Inceptors. I loved them in ninth. I used them in my early GT days, especially the plasma ones. I am disappointed a little bit by their damage output. I know we talked about this first thing this morning. Yes, they get twin linked, despite having, that's kind of substitute the dual wielding aspect. But I will tell you, 3 inches deep strike for 115 points. Just to simply, here's the synergy. You force a battle shock, hopefully eliminate the OC some way or another in the shooting phase, and you have had deep stroke. You had deep striked a Inceptor on top of an objective. You can remove their OC potentially. You gain the objective, but also they can't use any stratagems, and they also just have to deal with Inceptors, which aren't the biggest threat, but they're there. So I like them. I'm disappointed in the damage output, but I think there's some very powerful things you can do to steal objectives away.
Yeah, and they were on
They're
our
on my
most
paint
recent.
desk right now.
They're on your paint desk. I hate the models, unfortunately,
Yeah.
so I don't know if I'll be running them or not without heavy conversion. But when we talked about them on our video, they were actually one of our biggest losers. And something that I think some of our viewers got confused about is that, like, the units that we talked about that were biggest losers don't necessarily suck. And we did mention this in the video, but sometimes it gets overlooked. They don't necessarily suck. They're not terrible units. There's really only one terrible unit, and that's Van Vets. So you know the Inceptors
Rest
aren't
in peace.
bad, but they also don't have the same damage level of output that they had in uh, ninth edition, right? And that's what the comparison. That's what we meant by biggest winners and losers. Is the ones that were biggest losers lost a ton of their usefulness and their damage output and things like that in comparison to where they were in ninth. And
Yeah.
that's why Inceptors made that list. It's not that they're terrible. I mean, 115 points is cheap, like you said, and the meteoric descent is a very good rule. I think if you're taking them now, it's not because you expect them to kill a bunch of stuff. It's because they're like a little distraction carnifex, is what you're taking them now for.
And to kill lone operatives. I think there's a good point to take them
Yeah.
because there's a lot of pretty strong characters or small units now, like this Space Marine Scouts that we just talked about, that can just sit on a backfield objective and camp there and can't be shot. And that's where they come in. Even if I actually think of running them with the heavy vultures. And then they can maybe not kill the squad, but they will kill enough to actually maybe force a battle shock again or to flip an objective.
Yeah.
And it's just the mental game of having that unit there. And it's the same. I mean, against Tau, you have Ghost Keels. There, you're probably better off with Plasma, but or just the stealth suit. There's a lot of armies I think that will be running about. All of you thinking of going to a top table, my prediction, in all honesty, right now is I think we will see lists doing very well that have very good lone operative style units that are cheap, just so that you have units that can be interacted with, sitting in the backfield, holding objectives, and then thick bricks that can push towards the center of the board, that can trade very well, that can take some punishment in return. And if you can threaten that game style by having something like Inceptors that can deep strike and threaten those small units that otherwise you can't interact with, because you cannot get
You just
past the
can't
center of
get
the
there.
board, past those very tough units to get there. I think that's where Inceptors are going to be absolutely key. Absolutely key.
Yeah, that's good
Assassins.
points.
I think most people are gonna have an assassin in their list because they're just so good. Have either the Vindicare assassin or they're gonna have the Cassius assassin.
Yes.
Trying to lock. And
Yes.
if you want to lock down an assassin quick, get behind them. Unfortunately, the only unit in an entire game that can threaten an assassin within the second turn is the Inceptor.
That's
Inceptors.
true. That's true.
And you get 2 units with Oath of Oath moment, they kill an assassin. And now all your captains and apothecaries in your units can breathe again. Because until this point, they were hiding. That unit was making a conga line to wherever they wanted to go. And the last guy was that apothecary behind the wall, just being like, yo, guys, you all go. I will be here resurrecting you, but I'm not stepping out.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think that's a great point. And that's something that I don't think Bob and I were really thinking of at the time when we made that video. So, I don't know if that changes Bob's mind on whether they're the biggest, one of the biggest losers or not. I think they still, what they did in ninth, they were a pure DPS unit in ninth, and
Yeah.
they're just not that
It's a side
anymore.
shift.
Yeah, they're now they're more of a utility piece. That
Yeah.
can do a thing, be a distraction, kill a lone operative kind of thing. But they're not gonna. You're not gonna take them because it's like I'm gonna point and click and delete that unit with all this plasma anymore because it's not gonna happen.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
and I wouldn't if
And
you are
they're
running
not
if
easy
you
to
are
kill in return.
yeah, unless you're overcharging your plasma, which honestly I would not do with them because rolling a one and killing a unit that's that expensive, I mean they're what 38 points a unit or something like that, or model. I mean, if you math it out, I know it's all just units now. There's no model points anymore, but they're too expensive to risk rolling a one because you're always going to roll a one when you don't need to, when on that hazardous test, unless you're just like at the point where it's like this thing needs to die and I can do it if I overcharge, And if I don't, it doesn't matter. Like if it's at a point where it no longer matters anymore, yeah, sure. But initially, you don't want to risk losing those very rather expensive models in comparison to like a Hellblaster. Which, speaking of combos, Hellblasters are hilarious with an apothecary because they're like, "Oh, I died. I shoot again on death because I blew up my own gun." And then the apothecary's like, "It's okay, buddy. It's just a flesh wound. Get back up."
Yes.
Well, a couple things on the
But
on it.
but
Go ahead.
oh. Well, I just wanted to save our honor as Black Templar players and also say that the Apothecary does really well in close combat units, not only in Hellblasters. And in close combat units, I really take him to get the extra movement out of it. About all Blade Guard veterans with the bigger bases that we got, even if just one model gets slain, like, you almost want to be sitting there crossing fingers at your opponents. Like, don't hide them turn one. Actually, just have them a little bit out so that your opponent sees maybe with a couple units that unit, and just cross your fingers that they kill one, because that's a 4-inch movement you just got there for
Yeah.
having lost one guy. Because you can resurrect him in coherency. Our bases are big. It's actually a little bit more. It's like 4.5 inches you get out of movement from an apothecary bringing back any unit, but obviously if we want to get where we want to get as true Black Templar, which is close combat, your 6-inch movement unit now just got a 10.5-inch movement.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that is pretty cool is, the Sword Bros, I think, is the only 3-wound unit, 3-wound model, per model unit that he can resurrect. I
Yeah.
don't think any other squad he can join has 3 wounds. Um, so yeah, something that's pretty cool. David, you had something to say?
It was about the Inceptors. Remember the two things that I just want to make sure everybody understands is there's the hazardous adjustment. I think one of the things that's huge is you still can roll the results, if I understand it correctly. So it's not necessarily, okay, you killed the guy and you don't get the result from that because the hazardous test is at the end. But two, to
Correct.
Sasha's point, if you have a target that needs to die, you oath it so that you can re-roll it and reduce some of that risk.
So, well, the hazardous though is
Hazardous.
it's very different now. It's no longer related to your hit rolls, which means you can just speed
Yep.
roll everything. It's at the end of once you've shot, you take the number of hazardous weapons that shot and roll a dice for each one of those, and on a 1, a guy dies. So it's even better because now a
Well, you take
5-man,
3 mortal wounds.
if
You
you're,
take 3 mortal wounds.
yeah, if you're a
I
character
know if you're
or a
infantry,
vehicle.
he dies. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, if he's infantry,
You're right.
he's
Yeah,
dead. But if he's a
he dies.
character, a monster, or a vehicle, or something like that, then they take
Yeah.
3 mortal wounds, which is pretty brutal. But I guess it's better than dying, because Grimaldus is always just like, I don't know if I want to overcharge or not. So, yeah, exactly. So, but the odds are significantly less that you're going to lose anybody because now instead of like Hellblasters, before they were rolling two to three shots a guy, now they're rolling for a 5-man. It's just 5 dice. You might roll 1.
Yeah.
So and then you see if he shoots again, and then you get the apothecary to stand him back up. So, it's those kind of things. I like that change to hazardous a lot. It makes it a lot less deadly. And I think it's funny too. Some of the psychic stuff got hazardous if you like supercharge it or whatever. Filthy witches, they deserve to
Yeah.
die.
I do want to make a note on Sasha. So apothecaries can't join Blade Guard veteran. So that's
Yeah.
just one thing that you can't do anymore.
Yeah.
So
I didn't mean Blade Guard, so I meant the
Sword Brethren.
Sword Brethren.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sword Brethren. Not Blade Guard, sorry. Sword Brethren. Who
Very
takes Blade
excellent.
Guard if you're a Black Templar player?
I'm going to be using my Blade Guard models as company champs.
It's actually probably
Yeah,
my favorite model,
good
but
point. Good point.
Yeah.
it's probably my favorite model that I've
Yeah.
never used in a GT.
What, Blade Guard?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they're great
I do think
models.
they have a space. Yeah, I do think they are. If you bring them to a tournament, if you have them, you can bring them. Are they one of the best units? Probably not, but I think they're a decent enough unit to justify bringing them. But
Well, and
yeah, I think just mhm.
I was gonna say, there's always been this debate among the Black Templar community for virtually all of Ninth Edition. Well, should I take Blade Guard or should I take Sword Bros? Blade Guard just seemed like better Sword Bros, blah, blah, blah. And, I love that GW has really now separated them. Blade Guard is like, I'm going to stand here and not die, and I'm pretty decent in melee. And Sword Bros is, I'm going to murder everything I touch. Because they're really the DPS unit now, and the Blade Guard are really just more the tank, the stand here, don't die, be annoying to kill kind of thing, because they're a lot more. Yeah, that 4-up save gives them more durability. Although they did lose a little bit of durability because they don't have a 2-up armor save anymore, which kind of hurts them a bit.
That's actually big.
So
Yeah. And I think the reason I am running, so my current Black Templar list that I'm actually thinking of taking to Tacoma is an 11-man blob of Sword Brethren with 3 characters. So basically just put a captain in there, put a lieutenant in there, put an apothecary in there. That way you get 10 houses bones on the captain, so he doesn't die, and just roll at your opponent. It's a unit that's with the 5-up Feel No Pain, I think is tough enough to survive a lot. Your opponent really needs to think if they want to shoot them, because if they do, you get a d6-inch move out of Devout Push, and you can rest a model. Like shooting those, you gotta either kill the unit, or you're probably going to get charged next turn. Because between Devout Push, resting a model, a 6-inch move, and then charging, they make it across the board really fast. I play a lot with myself. I don't know if you guys do. Maybe I'm weird, but I put models on the table and just start rolling dice against myself, and I'm like, I tricked myself here. And I think
Like
that's one of
playing
the
chess.
yeah.
yeah, it's playing Warhammer against yourself. You will actually be surprised how good it is, because you're like, haha, here's my master plan. Or you're standing on one side of the table and you do all your moves and shoot, and then you go to the other side of the table and you're like, huh, I can counter it like this. Good move, sir. And then when you're back, you're like, oh crap.
It's actually kind of funny you talk about that. I don't myself because of my family situation, but a lot of the top players that I do know, they play lots of games with themselves, and that's one of the ways that you can test your synergies.
Yep.
I may or may have not been playing with myself last night. Gladius versus across the board.
He's got a chalkboard in the background. He's like, one.
We do have a comment. Kirk says that you can't have 3 characters in a single unit. They mentioned this in the rules commentary, apparently.
Yeah, they did.
So I'll have to go
rules
and
commentary. I think you can't put 3 characters in there. So.
Yeah. So, but I mean, still the apothecary and the captain.
In the video, they mentioned it.
No. In the
chapter 2, no matter
document.
what.
There was a design commentary. It's about 18 pages long, and I believe they mentioned that you can only include up to 2.
Let's see, attached.
Okay.
Even still, I think but I mean, you were including a captain and a lieutenant and an apothecary. You could probably drop the lieutenant, because we can get the
lieutenant
hits.
was just there for the fallback and charge.
Yeah. I still think it's still pretty gross with the apothecary and the captain in there. And it's something I made a meme about this on the server, because I think it's hilarious. Is Sword Bros being an 11-man squad, weirdly. I don't know why. I don't know, like GW is all about like what's in the box lately, and there's not 11 man between 2 boxes, so I don't know where they got that number from. But
hey guys, here's to hope that every second box we buy has an extra dude.
I know, right?
It's the lottery.
Yeah. So, but if you've seen the movie Spinal Tap, they're talking about like it's like what are those fake documentaries, and it's like about this band that's like, oh well, it's like look, most amps that go the volume only goes to 10. He goes, but look at this one right here, it goes to 11 across the board. It goes to 11, and the guy's like, well, why not just have 10 be the loudest, and 10 go. He's like, these go to 11. And so I made a meme with Sword Brethren. They go to 11. so yeah, I thought that was funny, and I mean it's weird, but it's like an extra guy. So okay, I'm not gonna turn down an extra guy. So
yeah.
and it fits nicely into a Land Raider Crusader with Grimaldus and his 4 models. So, David, you mentioned earlier Devout push versus squad tactics. I think this is kind of an interesting conversation. I did look at squad tactics because I completely forgot what it is. For everyone who doesn't know, it's used in your opponent's movement phase, just after an enemy unit ends a normal, advance, or fallback move, and one infantry or mounted unit from your army that is within 9 inches of the enemy that just ended the move is the target. And you can move up to d6 inches, a normal move up to d6 inches, um, or 6 inches if the tactical doctrine is active. And you cannot select a unit that is within engagement range of 1 or more enemy units. So I
This is
think, go ahead.
First off, I have to say I want to pour one out because Devout Push on 9th edition was my favorite stratagem. Piss people off all the time. Oh, I'm a Devout Push these Desolation Marines. By the way, they're stationary on my turn, so when I fire them. But I abused it. I didn't use it. I abused that stratagem a
Yeah,
lot in my tournament play.
it was really good.
It was really good. So it's not necessarily worse. You just have to be more strategic, and there's an argument that it actually extends movement even more so.
It's
And so
more
I would,
like Righteous Zeal from 4th edition. The old Righteous Zeal rule
Yeah.
where you got shot, you moved forward, except in this case, you can only do it with one unit instead of your whole army.
yeah.
I think for me, looking at both of these, I'm going to give the nod to the Devout Push. And the reason is because if an opponent moves within 9 inches of me on my turn, generally speaking, we're a close combat army. Like, yeah, please get closer to me. Like, okay. Versus, generally speaking, unless it's another close combat army whose that unit is potentially better than us, I feel like squad tactics you're going to use to move away from that unit or laterally or something like that. Versus Devout Push gets us closer so that on our turn we can charge a little bit better. Weirdly, it doesn't have a restriction of we can't use Devout Push on a unit that's in engagement range, but I don't think you can make a normal move when you're in engagement range anyway. So I don't know why they even have that caveat in the squad tactics. That's kind of weird to me because I don't think you can make it. I think the only move you can make in engagement is fallback.
It's a fallback. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what I like about squad tactics, I can go. I would say these are really equal.
The flexibility. Ooh.
The flexibility really is the flexibility because it could be an offensive thing or a defensive thing. So
Mhm.
the ability to go one or the other is really huge for me. I like things that have two sides to the sword. I really do. I like to be able to make that decision. If okay, again, Desolation Marines. Okay, you moved in with the intention to charge my Desolation Marines, and you've got an 8-inch charge. Well, I might make this a 9 all the way up to a 10, 12, 13-inch charge to get those
Yeah.
guys away from you. Or here's my favorite thing about squad tactics: getting them behind obscuring. Like, okay, this thing is behind obscuring. I need, on the other side of the wall, or vice versa. You can use squad tactics to really move a unit and completely block off some shenanigans or charges
Yeah.
or some shooting.
Counterpoint
Wait,
is
David. I got the right thing for you. 1 second. I got the right thing for David. Here's some blue. Like a true smurf.
A counterpoint. There's only one side to the sword, and it's the pointy end, and it goes in the other guy.
So to me, I can respect the tactical flexibility because I'm a competitive tournament player and I love to be able to have options in my toolbox. But what ultimately comes down to Righteous Crusaders versus Gladius is I feel like if you're in Gladius, you're relying on the strength of the datasheet itself versus in Righteous Crusaders, the vows give us something extra on top of it to push through. Um, well, yes, Gladius gives you the movement shenanigans that you have and the the strategies are a little bit different. But across the board, if you look across the uh, different armies and factions, if I feel like the stratagems are very similar in what you get. They're just named different and worded slightly different, and you essentially get different variations of the same thing across every army. So I kind of call the stratagems a wash. So it's really what your army rule is, and how you want to use it. So like in shooty Templars, maybe that the ability to manipulate movement is better for you. But if you're trying to utilize close combat or be more defensive, the Righteous Crusaders give you something extra on top of the data sheet that you didn't already have, other than like the movement. And that really is what kind of gives it the Righteous Crusaders to me. Is like, I want to be able to say at the beginning of my game, oh man, I'm fighting these Thousand Suns, a Horde of the Witch all the way.
And I'll just jump in here, and I will on video concede that the Righteous Crusader detachment is better than Gladius, and for two reasons. For one, I didn't know I could take Oath as Righteous Crusader, and so I was like, oh, so all the powerful shooting synergies that I love are still going to be just as powerful. But to your point, the reason why I'm bringing this up now is I did math this out, and I like really just dove into the stratagem specifically last night. And you're right, it's pretty much a wash on the either player turn. And then on your turn, there's an argument that's was it a Storm of Fight? Yeah, Storm of Fire is a little bit better on the your turn stratagems. But actually, when it comes to the opponent's turn stratagems, No Escape is awesome. I
It's
absolutely love that
really
mechanic
good.
in ninth. It's so good. I did 3 check marks. That's the most check marks I've ever put on. And because that, with a combination being able to take Oath, I'm willing to flip over and on this call and say, you know what, you guys are right. The Righteous Crusader is better, but I do appreciate the ability to argue this out.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I mean,
And
there are
we
use
take
cases
our
for
Phobos
Gladius.
captain.
Yeah.
Take your Phobos captain, charge something turn 1, prevent it from falling back.
Yep. You know, and to your point, No Escape, like, yeah, it's a 50-50 chance. And some people are like, I never got it. Okay, well, that's just dice. That's not the strat's fault. You know, preventing something from falling back, even if it's a 50-50 chance, is incredibly powerful because that can swing the game, right? And No Escape only got better in this edition. So now you can get a +1 if you're in, I think it's accept any challenge. And if you fail, they have to take a desperate escape test for every model. That's brutal because now,
You
okay,
get
cool.
something for either way.
They may not decide to fall back.
Yeah, and so you said that I want to speak to the 50-50 chance piece. So Sascha mentioned this early on the call too. Psychology is everything in the game. And so when you just tell a player that, hey, I have this stratagem, it's unique to my detachment, you just have to tell them that. Also, they forget that there's a 50-50% chance. They don't even think about the fact that it is a good chance or a split chance that it's going to be in their favor. They just have in their head that, oh God, he can do this to me, and even if I succeed, I have to take a desperate fallout, and it gets in their head and really changes their decision making on the spot.
Yep. Yeah.
I think that's it's a good point that you bring up as an overarching theme with tournament players in general, is you have to have a ton of different multifaceted things that you are using that are throwing at your opponent to make them think and make choices, because eventually they're going to make the wrong choice, and that's when you're going to capitalize on it. So we talked a little bit earlier about Inceptors. That's something they have to think about in the back of their mind. They have to protect their backfield with something else as a countercharge because they don't want their scout squad to die, or infiltrators, or whatever it is. I mean, strategic reserves, or maybe you have reavers or something that can force battle shock, whirlwind, or thunderfire cannon to reduce movement. You got to throw all these different faceted things into your list. Obviously, you want to make sure they synergize together, but the more things that you can make your opponent think, and a lot of times you can do that before the game. You're running through your list. You're like, oh, I can Devout Push. Oh, I can No Escape. You're not going to be able to fall back. Then they're going to be like, oh my gosh, maybe I'm not going to be able to do this during the game because XYZ. So the more you can make your opponent think about all the different things that you can do will potentially force a mistake later on in the game. And that's how tournament players win games.
Yep, it's 100% how I want.
Or at least, yeah, it's not always that, right? Like quite often when people ask me in different sports like that I coach sometimes, or even Warhammer, is like, how do you win? Like, how do you start winning games? And at the beginning, I just use volleyball as a reference. When you start playing volleyball against a person that plays volleyball, don't try to be the better. Just try to get the ball on the other side. They will make a mistake. And it really just comes once you hit that tippity top of the skill level. That's when games are not decided anymore on who makes more mistakes early on. But then it really comes down to the wire, to the little tweaks in a list. So who anyone out here who wants to increase their win rate at the beginning, you just need to make sure you play a better game. Like make sure you don't make mistakes. Your opponent very likely will. Warhammer is a game that has so many rules. We all have lives. We don't play it perfectly. But make sure, learn your rules, play your own rules well, and it will help you also winning games later on. And
Well,
then you go from there.
and to your point, to use your sports analogy, you know, even professional athletes make mistakes. I mean, the best quarterback in the world still throws interceptions. The best pitcher in the world still throws a meatball down the center that gets crushed out of the park for a home run. So I mean, pro players make mistakes too, and those, if you make fewer mistakes than your opponent, you're in a good spot. That's
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
the point I think Sasha's trying to make. And
Yeah.
nobody's ever going to be perfect, and even the
Exactly.
best 40K players in the world are still going to make mistakes, because that's just how it is. We're human. So just make fewer mistakes than your opponent. Know your rules really well. Don't be me in my first game, in 10th edition, where I forgot that Oath of Moments even existed. So, so it's like I was so excited to play 10th, and I'm putting the Vindicator on the table for the first time since 5th edition, and then I completely forgot that Oath of Moment existed. So, yeah, among a host of other
Fair enough.
mistakes I made. So,
Yeah, he always messaged me after his game. He's like, this happened, and I'm like, did you do X, Y, Z? And they're like,
no.
and then it's just silence.
Hey, listen, I'll do one. I'll do you one better. I'll make you feel better. I had never read the 9th edition rules until Atlantic City. Never read the rules. So
I'm just gonna
playing,
take second turn and I'll do everything what you did.
I
Yeah.
played, and that's actually part of the strength of my show up at Atlantic City. And it was funny is I've got a buddy of mine, Mark. He plays me very hard. He plays Tyranids. He actually was at top tables, I believe, at Atlantic City. He played you, Sasha, Tyranids, on
Benning?
camera. Yeah, Mark Benning. So him and
Yeah.
I spar all the time, and he's been one of my coaches to really push me to a high level in this year that I've been playing. And I remember the last time we played at his place, he was going through my list, and I'm playing an alternative list for Richmond, and it was not my list. It was something I just wasn't flexing. He goes, first off, you need to flex back into your old list. You know it so well. I don't like this new list, and he was right. I just knew my list so well. I knew the rules of it. And the second thing he goes, you should also go read the rules. You just make these little things, these decisions that you're making. If you just knew the rules, you'd actually. Because I've just been playing based on what people were telling me how to play the game. I just want to catch up and play. That's all I ever cared about. And I just don't learn really well by literally reading a book. That's not how I learn. So I remember before Atlantic City, I'm like going through the rules. I'm like, oh my goodness, I could do all these cool things.
Yeah.
The strategic reserve was a big one for me. But you guys are right. If you know your army better than they know their army, you already have one up
leg up.
on a leg up. And if you know the rules better than them, you've got two leg ups.
Yeah.
And typically, the game will go in your favor on that alone.
Something that I really did in 9th edition, and I'm going to do it again in 10th edition, was I learned, especially the core rules and the way interactions work extremely well. And I did that. I mean, obviously, I've been playing 40K since 4th edition, so we've had changes over time. One of the hardest things since edition change is picking out what's changed from previous editions, right? Because when you're reading rules and you know the previous edition so well, it's very easy to just be like, yeah, this all looks the same, but there was some sentence in there that you skimmed over that wasn't the same. But something that I did in 9th edition was made a point of anytime I'm in several Discord servers. I'm actually an admin for Auspex Tactics server, and they have a rules query. Uh, they have a rules query channel in there, and I made sure that anytime questions were asked, I would always try to answer them and go and find out those interactions, because that helped me learn all these weird, intricate interactions,
Yeah.
which also elevates my game because one, I know the rule out of the gate. I don't have to think about it because I've already answered this question somewhere. But also, it allows me to think of some of these weird combos, like how to slingshot models using charge moves in ninth edition. Can't really do that anymore in 10th because GW kind of put the kibosh on it. But in ninth, you could use a charge
Yeah.
move
Only took
to
him 10
slingshot
editions.
models. I even made a Templars tip video about how to do it because it caught my one friend off by surprise when I slingshotted Sword Brethren after murdering his Wave Serpent. And he's like, that's BS. And I'm like, that's how the rules work. Like, so, doing stuff like that, like anytime, even if like a question has already been answered, go in and look up those relevant rules for yourself, and suss out why that's the case, because that will help you to learn the rules better, the core rules better. And even if you don't know your opponent's army as well as your own army, that's fine. If they are trying to do something and you're like, that doesn't sound right, can I see that rule? You'll be able to read their rule and think about the interaction and determine whether it's correct or not. So
I did the same thing early on, by the way. I joined that Discord, and that's the one channel I set so that I would see every question, and it was the same thing. I just wanted to hear the question, hear the answer, and understand those synergies better. So that's
yeah.
actually a really good tip for any new players who are trying to elevate their game.
Yep. Yeah. I've thought about whether we should add a rules question to our server, a channel specifically for rules questions.
Oh no,
Um,
don't do that, because I knew if I needed to get a hold of you, I would go to the rules channel of Auspic Tactics and say, "Hey, I'm gonna ask a question." All of a sudden, I got them.
that's true. That's true. I am in there a lot. In fact, my handle on there is Ace Bauer, Ancient Rules Master, because I'm also like the average age of people in that server is like 20. So me, I'm 41. Like I feel like a dinosaur in there. So yeah,
That's old men.
old men, get off my
But
lawn,
hey,
you
I
damn
think
kids.
it's good that you help young people. I think one of the biggest thing we as veterans, or maybe David not as much veteran, but we'll include you in here, is that we need to help also other people to facilitate the entry into the hobby. I
Yeah.
think I honestly want to play 40k until I'm 80. Like I want to take this to my grave. Like on my gravestone is going to be written, "Here lies Sascha, Black Templar player and Imperial Fist player forever." And I think to get that done, we just got to make sure that the hobby stays as positive as it is. I think Warhammer is one of the best communities in any hobby I've ever been in, and just make sure that new people get in here, roll dice, have fun, show up to tournaments. Most people think that tournament players are not friendly, not fun. Most of them are, I promise. And yeah, I think helping 20 years old with rules is one of those ways to get people into the hobby.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
that's one of the reasons why Implausible Nature exists. Is back in fifth edition, like I was starving for tactical information, because I was getting out of fourth, and you know, in my teenage years, I wanted to just graduate. I wanted to get into tournament. I want to travel. I want to do that, and there was nothing out there. But I still had played in numerous tournaments and such. So I kind of started in Plausible Nature, and I wanted to build up the community. Like there wasn't a lot of Black Templars players that were traveling to tournaments and doing that. So I wanted to take my experiences and kind of build the community, help teach people to get better, and it's kind of grown into this. So I love that we're all able to get together as a community and kind of build each other up. So
Yeah, I can
yeah.
I can see see it now. Sasha's like 80 years old, the nurse is like helping you with your walker, and it's like the new Tyranid rules are bullshit. And it's sure thing, Grandpa. Let's get you back to your room.
Yeah, I
So
stand as a testament to the power of the community. I started, just over a year ago, and I met Sasha at Nova last year, He's one of the great masters of this game, and he was quick to say, "Hey, let's get dinner." And I remember we were eating dinner with a handful of other players, eating some Indian food, going through my list, and really opening my eye up and looking at the game a little bit differently, specifically at looking at data sheets differently. But every player I've interacted with at a top level has been just like that. They've reached
Yeah.
out to me proactively
Yeah.
and said, "Hey, I had oh man, I forget. Sean Nadine reached out to me at Atlantic City, just pulled me
Aiden.
aside. Nadine, yeah, thank you. He just pulled me outside and saw where I was at, my results, and gave me some really quick wisdom there. And I keep finding these interactions at every tournament I go to, and I've never seen that in anything else I've ever been in terms of like hobby or game. It's very unique to Warhammer, and I think the best thing that I could do and the best thing that all of us could do is just simply continue to pay it forward. If you're having a game and it's not going in their favor, one of the things Derek Apshe does really well that I really appreciate, he'll say, "Hey, all right, here's what I think you could do differently. What do you think I could be doing differently?" He'll kind of decompress at the end of the game, but also make sure that he leaves that player in a better place than when he had got them.
Yeah.
And I think that's just what we have to continue to do to promote the community.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we've got a super chat, Grand Enforcer. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your support there. He asks, I absolutely love Dreadnoughts and lore. The panel may have mixed feelings on them, however. Any suggestions as to what synergies would work well with them and make them additionally more effective? So, this is actually a great question because Dreadnoughts, especially the Redemptor class Dreadnoughts, have gotten pretty pricey. They are, I think, a little better. But what are your guys' thoughts on how we're gonna run, if we're gonna run dreadnoughts, how we're gonna run them, and where they are, sitting right now?
I love them. There's my favorite models. I have 3 Redemptor Dreads. I have 2 Brutalises, and now I got the 1 Ballistus. I even have a Leviathan, and I'm kind of disappointed that they got rid of that for me. I love
Yep.
Dreadnoughts. I've ran Dreadnought lists before in RTTs with some great success. I think, unfortunately, it kind of fall into the same issues from ninth. They're just a little too expensive for what they do now. The one argument I would say is Brutalis for a couple different reasons. Um, you could just have him parked somewhere, and they're not going to want to touch it because he's just an absolute beast in melee, and tank charge is a thing. Like
Yeah.
if you really want to wipe a squad, being
Tank
able to
shock is
tank
gross.
shock, thank you, tank
Yeah.
shock is disgusting.
Yeah.
And so I think there's an argument there, but he's 220 points, and so it's like
Yeah.
it's that's where they kind of fall. RTTs, I think they're going to be really great. I think it'd be really powerful in the mid tables, but I just don't think I think they're just going to hit a ceiling too quickly because of their point cost.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which
I
I mean
think
is at
they.
least something that can change relatively quickly. Points cost versus updating the data sheet is generally something that doesn't happen very often. So, but points cost, is certainly, I think, if that's their hang up, that's a much more easily fixed problem, by GW, which is good.
Yeah, I think.
So good.
I was gonna say is like I think from last edition, Space Marine Dreadnoughts were kind of like the thing that everyone kind of defaulted to and how good they were. That there was a little bit of a knee jerking to kind of prevent that into this going into this meta here of 10th edition. But I think they might see an adjustment pretty quick when people are going to see that they're not in a lot of lists. So that's going to be one thing to be looking forward to. I don't think they're going to be in this initial set because they're not really a problematic unit at this point in time. But in general, if you're taking onesies and twosies into a list, I think that's possibly okay with the different things, especially the the cheaper ones, the firstborn box knots, as just a simple cheap unit to kind of threaten the middle of the board. Um, as far as synergies and things like that, anything with the Primaris Tech Marine is just stupid. So
He's really good.
it's just a problem because like all the characters are so good, like you can't
You
take
can't
everything.
fit them all.
Take them all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
if you have him follow a dread, he gets killed. All of a sudden, he becomes Super Saiyan, so to speak. And he goes
Yeah.
into beast mode, and he's got lone operative, so it's like you can't shoot him, and you do not want to approach him. So it's like, all right, cool, you killed my dreadnought. Now he's got 7 extra attacks or something ridiculous, and park him on an objective. It's yours.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if you're gonna be taking like some whirlwinds or a vindicator, and you're gonna be running like a land speeder or two to give that +1 to hit for blast weapons, popping a redemptor into that list as well, to complement the others since their plasma is blast, could be useful. I think, as Bob said, I think you can, you know, now with how good some of the other vehicles are, I think you can pop in one Dreadnought. Like in ninth edition, I wouldn't run any less than two because vehicles were not really useful. They were too fragile, with a couple exceptions. And so Dreadnoughts, because they were durable, were what people were running. But if you run one, it's just going to get focused down. So you needed at least two to do anything. I think now with, if you're running some Gladiator Lancers, maybe a Vindicator, maybe a Land Raider or something like that, and then you can just pop in a single Dreadnought, I think that can work. I don't know that running 3 to 4 Dreadnoughts is going to be smart, because they're just so points intensive right now. But I think sticking one in a list, with some other armor, that's maybe just as high priority to attack, can certainly be useful. And I like I'm unsure yet about the ballistas, but it is pretty cheap. It's only 170, so it's a significantly cheaper. But for the same points, for 10 points less, I feel like I'd rather have a lancer. So um, so yeah, so that's kind of my take on it. I do need to get my Brutalis put together. Actually, I have two of them that are still unbuilt. Uh, I do want to get one of those together and get one on the table because I still like melee dreads are fun.
Yeah. And I think the only thing I would maybe add here quickly is the Contemptor Dreadnoughts might be a bit overshadowed, but I do think they can work well in Black Templar list.
Mhm.
They have a small profile, so they're easy to hide. I think that's a big thing that speaks in their favor. And then if you are playing already a relative aggressive style where you're going into the center of the board, I do think that their rule of resurrecting once per game is
It's
actually pretty
hilarious.
big. There's a
It's
lot of
hilarious.
armies that really can only interact in one phase or another really well. And that means that you will get to interact back. Like even if you just move out and then he gets shot to death, most armies won't be able to kill him in close combat after, so you will get a full turn out of them. And again, if you bring an attack marine, you can even heal them after they rest.
Yep.
So they are definitely a bit on the pricier side, and you cannot lean on them to win the game. But I do think they're one of those great tools that, again, put in strategic reserve, bring them on a side of a board where your opponent doesn't have all the anti-tank, anti-shooting. Now they kill him. Now he comes back and he takes the objective. Like I think they're great skirmisher units. They have a small profile, and more importantly, with the layout that GW just gave us, there is not a lot of terrain that fully obscures. So I do think that Contemptor Dreadnoughts have a better time on those boards than some other units. And if you then run one or multiples, I think if you want to take just one, I think he's a good skirmisher unit. If you run three, I do think they become even a force that the opponent needs to respect. If you run them together, run them into the center, because each one got to be killed twice, literally, till they go
Yeah.
down, and they still have a flat 3 damage weapon in combat. They can put out some mortals in shooting if you take them. I will take them with the assault cannon, not the multi-melter anymore. If you take 3, maybe the multi-melter is better. You oath something, all 3 shoot at that target that can do something about it. But yeah, if you do Dreadnoughts, I do think Gladius is the better detachment then, because you get the extra mobility out of advance and shooting and advance and charging. So if you want to run Dreadnoughts, I think Contemptors are decent, decent to good actually, I think, but then better in a Gladius. So you get the extra mobility which Dreadnoughts will need.
Yeah, and I think the Kara's assault cannon on the Contemptor got better this edition too. It was pretty weak last edition. I think it's gotten a lot better since then as well. I think it gained a pip of strength. It's got devastating wounds now. It still has a lot of shots. So yeah, I would agree with that. And Contemptors are only 170 points. So that's pretty cheap. That's in what I would call popcorn unit territory, basically distraction carnifexes, things that are like you can't really ignore this unit, but you don't want to spend a lot shooting it either. Like I don't care if you kill it, and it's got a resurrect mechanic, which is hilarious, which makes it all that much better. So great shout out on that.
All right, so we're getting towards a 25-minute mark here left on it, and I want to save a little bit of time at the end for some questions. So I'll spend about 10-15 minutes shortly kind of going around the room here and seeing kind of 10th edition, got a few games. What are you doing with your list? What's the biggest thing that jumped out to you? Because this is going to be the golden question a lot of new players are going to be looking at. And how do I build my Black Templars? So what are you guys playing? What's jumping out to you?
Well, like I said, after my game, I really went back to my list and said, and this was true in 9th edition. It'll be true in 10th edition. It'll be true in 11th edition. So here's some general advice for all players. As you're building your list, look at the missions. And if you're a tournament player, wait for the tournament pack. Sasha's mentioned that he waited as well until he got a tournament pack, and get a couple of games in and try things out. Whenever you touch a model, Brad Chester, Desert Glory, I credit him for saying this. He goes, whenever you touch a model, it should be getting you points or denying the player points. So look for those units that you have in your arsenal that are going to get you those points when you're looking at those missions, and also have the ability to deny those. So I say this because after my first 10th edition, I realized I didn't have models that can gain me some points on certain tactical missions, and I was having to throw those away, and that felt bad because I realized very quickly in a GT environment, I do not want to throw away a tactical mission, like if that's what they're using. So I'm trying to create a little more flexibility in my list instead of just leaning all into shooting and trying to table the opponent. I can't rely on that. So that's why, like I said during this call, the first thing I did is I added scout snipers and scouts to my list so I could have some infiltrate, some better infiltrate. I added Inceptors immediately because I knew like I wanted to be able to get into the back zone because some of those missions require being in their deployment zone. But I still leaned into what I knew best, and I think I'm going to leave with that is also make sure you're including units you truly know best because it goes into that prep. While you might not be optimizing or min-maxing as well as you feel like you should, if you simply know your list better than the opponent knows their list, you're going to be above them in terms of play strength.
Yeah, and I would kind of add on to that a little bit. Don't change your list until at least you got 3 games in with them. So, because the law of averages is you may have a bad game, they may do nothing on a particular list, but the next game they might overperform.
Yeah.
So you don't know where that median is until you've played a few games. So don't change it until you've had a few games.
Yeah, and something that I realized after playing my first game, I used the what do you call it? The fixed missions. My opponent used the tactical missions. I need to really sit down and go through the tactical missions. I was kind of leery. I didn't want to try them because I remember the forget the name of the deck that they
Maelstrom of
yeah,
War.
Maelstrom, and then the ninth one had Tempest of War or something. I can't remember what they called it. Um, and some of them like were just completely unachievable, and not even because it was like kill a psyker and you have no psychers. It's like get to objective 6, and it's all the way across the board. It's like that's never going to happen on this turn, right? So or any subsequent turn, he's got it locked down with half his army. They it seems like just based on what cards my opponent drew that they've kind of done away with some of those ones that are too difficult.
Yeah.
Like the tactical ones are a lot better, so I need to sit down and look at all the tactical ones because when I was looking through the fixed ones, there's only a few, and I'm thinking to myself, well, I don't have enough units for this. Well, I don't have enough units for this. And like some of these, like you really have to, if you're going to take fixed missions, you really got to make sure that you've planned your list around what fixed missions you're going to take, because they're no longer really that opponent dependent. Um, they're much more list dependent with the way they work, because a lot of things like, you know, I think it was deploy, teleport, I don't know. There were several that is like you can't shoot or charge to get these points, and I needed the units that I had to be shooting and charging. So that made me think, man, I really need to know these mission cards very well before I sit down and build a list, because it's going to inform me on what kind of units and how many units and things like that I need to take in my lists.
I agree with all those statements. I think the only thing I can add here really is you will sometimes run into a curveball list. So some tournament list about when you go to a tournament, you will face down someone who just goes all out into shooting, or all out into combat. I think World Eaters were one of the best sample that we can use here at the end of ninth, where basically they didn't have to care about secondaries, they just had to charge you. And when you start to try to hit a balance between killing your opponent, surviving the game, and scoring missions, your list inevitably becomes a bit more diluted. You are not master of any, but you can do a little bit of everything. But then if you face a list that's just like purely one thing, they usually will be better at that. And that's just something you need to accept. Like that's also something I think as a tournament player, you need to get into your own head is the pairings. Sometimes pairings just don't work out and you face down a list that you can't win really, or you just got to get lucky. And that's where you like deploy on the deployment line and you just like throw yourself at the opponent. And maybe that's the one game where dice are in your favor. But for the majority of games, it is important that you hit that balance of being able to play a good game while scoring your points. And to score points, you just got to be familiar with missions. So start there. I usually like the first units I take are mission units. Like my first 500 points are units I take to play the missions. In this edition, it's going to be scouts. I personally still love the Landspeeder Storm. I'm going to probably bring at least one or two with a regular scout squad. The ability to move 14 inches with a fly vehicle and disembark and still charge with those scouts is again enough to threaten some small units somewhere on the side of the board. We already talked about Inceptors, don't need to talk more about them. And then I'm definitely still bringing infiltrators that deny 12-inch deep strike for the opponent, or I think it's still great. And then from there, I built the rest of my list. And then it really goes, what do I like right now more? Till now, I personally didn't settle fully on what I want to play because I knew a points change will be happening very soon. I mean, after seeing Wraith Knights, after seeing Desolator Marines, I was like, with how quickly they had fixed Deathwatch, I knew this will be fixed probably before Tacoma because I was going to that demand. I was like, honestly, I don't think Mike would let this slide. So I didn't buy 30 Desolation Marines yet. I was like, I'm going to hold out here. I'm pretty sure they're going up to a higher point cost. So instead, I just actually focused a little bit more on units I like, that I like the models that I knew. All right, I think some Sword Brethren will be good. If I run 5 for 10, so I have some Sword Brethren ready. I have some units that I said before for mission play. I was really hoping the character issue would get fixed with Helbrecht not being a chapter master, but unfortunately he's not. So probably Helbrecht is going to sit this one out in lieu of a captain.
I sent an
He's going to
FAQ
give up his
email. Send GW an FAQ email on that, guys. If you're watching that, send them an email, because they did say they're going to have a FAQ in the next couple weeks on addressing some errors and stuff like that. I think that's really an error because our Castellan model literally says he can join a captain or a chapter master, but we have no chapter master technically, keyword wise. So it really, because now that's not like a upgrade you can buy anymore, right? So you really, it makes no sense that they put that in there and then didn't give him the keyword. So send them a FAQ.
It's an oversight.
Yeah, I think it'll get fixed eventually. I just don't know how long it'll take.
I think we have to
exactly. No, same.
I think we have to really kind of. I know he doesn't watch the channel, but I have to call out Mike Brandt to. For those that don't know, you mentioned earlier he's ahead of the tournament for GW, but before that he ran like 15 years of Nova Open from scratch out of Washington D.C. So I attended it numerous times. Great guy, very knowledgeable, very good player at tournament highest levels. Won many tournaments. So I think this is a great hire by Games Workshop. He wants the tournament scene to succeed. So he's watching all of this stuff. So you saw it at the end of 9th edition.
Yes.
And those balance updates were were great. Yeah, and now we're seeing that they're getting changed out significantly. So I want to just call out Mike. I know he doesn't watch, but awesome job.
Yes, I agree, 100%. The interaction Mike has created between the company as such and the community is amazing. And I honestly don't know. I'm actually pretty sure Mike has clones, because this man is working probably a full-time job with GW, and I'm sure he's putting in more than 40 hours a week. And on top, he's on most Facebook pages still engaging with people and like reading stuff and answering things. I'm just like, dude, like, congrats. And he has a life. Like, I mean, this guy is traveling all the time too. Like, you're like looking at his pictures, you're like, how are you doing? So yeah, huge shout
Probably
out to
still
Mike
training
Grant
his
and
dolphins. I don't know,
yeah,
he
exactly.
was a dolphin trainer back in another life.
So yeah, no. And I think that's really what rounds up list taking, right? Right now, at the beginning of an edition, take what you like, play units you're familiar with, know the rules for the units you want to play, don't make mistakes, go kill some Cenas. That's it.
Awesome.
All right,
And I
so
think that kind of answers Valentin's question of, are there some core units you can always build around, or is list building more leaning into specialized gimmicks or, combos and things like that? I think that pretty well sums that up too, at least right now. You want to focus on things that and, things that you think will work well. And I mean, try stuff out because
Yeah.
it's so early that, like, yeah, sometimes stuff looks great on paper, and you put it on the tabletop and play 5 games with it, and you're like, this just didn't do it for me,
Yeah.
so yeah.
yeah,
And
for
also
me that
what's very, very likely is that the meta would shift. We didn't really had yet big tournaments. So probably right now it's always easy at the beginning to lean into the killing aspect of a game, of being like, this is brutal, this is what will table my opponent. And then the first tournament happens and you all of a sudden look at the top 8s and all of them had like lists where everyone is like, what are they doing? And then it shifts, right? Like then people are like, oh, I actually don't need to just bring units that kill. I need to bring some units that maybe do this or that. And that's why I think right now we're still in this like evolving phase where right now, also without the point changes yet, we have some on paper clear winners, but I'm pretty sure that some of the like top players out there are already coming up with how to counter those lists, which then eventually will lead to maybe a more established meta once we had some results coming in, some top tables. I mean, yeah, that's my personal perspective of it.
Yeah.
All right, so we got a couple other questions I can knock out pretty quick. Paul Wooten says, did you ever find out if Grimaldus joining the Premier Crusader Scout makes them lose the Scout rule? Yes, they do lose the Scout rule. That was clarified in the notes, designer note commentary, that if in the case of Deep Strike and like things like Scouts, you take the common denominator, the lowest common denominator of that rule. So if the PCS have Scout 6, Grimaldus has Scout 0 because it doesn't have the rule. You take the lowest Scout rule, so it's a 0. Let's see what we got here. What do y'all think of Blade Guard? We did talk about that a little bit earlier. Our opinion is they have
They're
a
fine.
place. They're fine, but
They look cool.
They look cool.
they look cool. They probably are not going to be sitting in heavily utilized blocks anymore.
No.
Maybe
But-
unit here.
One of the fun synergies that I came up with, I was like, okay, this could be fun. I don't know if it's necessarily competitive, but I love the Repulsor Executioner. Anything that's T12 in this game is really a great premium, I think. I don't know, can they load into a Repulsor Executioner?
Yeah.
But if having them in some sort of transport, and then as you're pushing up, leaving them behind, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But
They can also ride in a pulsar too. So, yeah, I mean, I think they're durable enough that, like, you take a little 3-man squad to set on an objective somewhere in the backfield or on the sideboard or whatnot, and just make it annoying for your opponent to have to kill, because like they shoot a little bit of anti-infantry fire at them. It's not going to do anything. They really have to dedicate something to kill them, and they're decent in melee. They're cheap enough. Like, are we going to be using them as the like primary combat units? No. Sword Bros are much better. Even Terminators are better, in my opinion. Crusaders. Crusaders are ridiculous in combat now, as they should be. But and that's kind of the role that Bob and I have been preaching for them for a long time now. Is they're a durable tanky unit that can just sit there and be annoying to kill. And that's how I'd continue to use them in 10th.
All right, so reading up a little bit, Philip French says, how do you think and feel Black Tide will hold up versus all the indirect and blast? So I
This is a great
will
question for
caveat
Sasha,
that.
because Sasha likes Black Tide. So let's hear it from him. You wanted to caveat that real quick, Bob?
Yeah, I was going to say that it sounds like they're going to address indirect, but blast is a thing. So
Correct. I think blast is a thing. Now the question is, what is Black Tide, right? If you want to run 120 Crusaders, I think there's few armies that can deal with it. In all honesty, my first reaction to 10th edition and looking at the points was like 320 a squad. That means I can run 6 units and still have points for 2 characters. I mean, that's 240 OC on the board. 4 of those units will scout. I advance and charge you. If you don't have it to kill it, you don't have it to kill it. So I think that's the reaction. If you play a more normal style where you might have,
I'll try building and painting all that.
yeah, exactly.
That's what commission painters are for.
Yeah, if I could play regular scouts as neophytes, I would actually have it. So.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, but yeah, no. So the rest for Black Tide, I do think it has a place. I do think about 2 units with the 5 for Phenol Pain, 1 for Tannhauser Bones, 1 for Grimalders are amazing units. AP has gone down significantly in the game, so you will usually have a 5-up armor save, 5-up Phenol Pain. Those units are tanky, so I definitely think you do that. One of my things I do when I build lists is I tend to be a bit more on the extreme side. If I start running, let's say, 2 big blocks of 20 guys or 1 of 20 and a big unit of 11 sword brethren, I will not run tanks. And the reason is, don't give your opponents anti-tank weapons a good target to shoot them. If you take 40, 50 marine bodies and then 1 dreadnought or 1 lancer, I personally don't like it, because now your opponent's anti-tank weapons, they have a good target. They have the 1 target to shoot, and then after they will start shooting your infantry. So if you run Black Tide, I personally then just only take Black Tide. The only exception sometimes is transport vehicles. They just fulfill for me the role of delivering more than a trading aspect of the game. So if you run, let's say, 60 Marines or 70 Marine bodies and want to have an Impulsor or Rhino or so in there, I do think they have a space, but I wouldn't then run anything that is a high toughness single model. Just so you take away from your opponent those couple last cannon shots, those couple things. Now they can just shoot Marines and they might not even kill them. And huzzah.
Yep. Yeah, it's a great call out. Like, it sort of goes back to what I was saying earlier. You don't want to run, like in 9th edition, we weren't running vehicles, so running 1 Dreadnought wasn't viable because it was just a target. Same thing goes now. If you only have points for 1 or 2 tanks, they're just going to get focused down. You need to be bringing, 3 or 4 or more, and then you're going to run out of points for 2 blocks of 40, 20-man squads pretty quickly to do all that and still have the synergies and the combos that you need to do it. Something else that somebody mentioned earlier, which we never really kind of addressed, is we got a few minutes left here. Firstborn Crusaders are back to the old 5th edition way of you can run a heavy weapon and a special weapon in a 5-man squad, the old Las Plaz squad that we used to run, or Faux Devi, some people called it. What do you guys think about little 5-man squads of Crusaders?
Extremely good. 75 points. I have 1 or 2 in almost every list I have so far built. This gives you 2 units to sit back, 2 last cannons. Everyone needs to bring a last cannon now. Put a plasma gun in there. I think for the min aspect, they are great. If you have those 75 points to spare, perfect.
Yeah. think they'll definitely see a resurgence a little bit, which is nice. And
Yeah.
the sergeant can still take a combi weapon, which is a little weird.
Yeah.
Weird profile now, but it's still
Combi
solid. So
weapon.
power fist.
Yeah. Combi
So
weapon and a thunderhammer or whatever. Yeah.
definitely. ML asks, is a repulsor with a 10-man Hellblaster and Apothecary a good combo for us? I don't know if they needed a repulsor. I almost feel like they want to walk so that they can shoot from turn 1. I
Especially
realize you
since
can
you
get
just
out. Go ahead.
yeah, there's two things that you just kind of solve for without needing the repulsor altogether. And that one is you brought an apothecary.
Yeah.
Two, we just decided that yes, a Righteous Crusader is the detachment to go for. So
Yeah.
just as Sasha said earlier, if you're bringing Hellblasters and you want to move them up, if you want to move them up further faster, get them shot.
Yeah. Get them shot with Devout push, and then shoot on death, and then resurrect them, and then advance and shoot some more because their guns are assault and heavy now. And remember, assault no longer has a -1 to shoot when you advance, which is amazing. So they've got a pretty awesome threat range by themselves. I don't think they need a transport. Although sticking 5 with an apothecary and a impulsor is kind of hilarious because you can zoom up the board and then shoot out of the firing deck, and I think that's why the
Right and
impulsor
dirty.
I think that's why the impulsor works versus a repulsor does not have firing deck, so they can shoot from the safety of the impulsor and make them last even longer. Kirk says, my opponents don't want to shoot the 5-man Crusader squads when I have a 20-man PCS with Grimaldus going up the middle of the board. Yeah, exactly. So,
Hey, there's nothing wrong with.
And that's but
I
I
was
just
gonna.
wanted to say it's the threat saturation, right? Like if you have too many targets for your opponent sometimes to shoot, that's really where the value of leaning into one aspect, right? Like go all infantry or go all tanks. Your opponent only has so many guns that are good at it, and if he needs to pick shooting your 20-man blob that's in his face over your 5 or 10 Hellblasters that you have in the backfield, not every army will have the guns to deal with it.
yeah, absolutely.
So we got time for probably one more question, and then we're gonna sign off for the day. So first come, first serve. What do you got for us? There's gonna be a little bit of delay between the stream and us.
I have a question, Sasha. It was our 9th edition list at that top table. If it was you versus me, how would that game go? We were just so opposite. So
Oh,
I just,
you have no chance.
you know what? I figured I had one chance, and that's if I won the roll off for terrain, and then I would immediately put some force right in the center. Like, there you go, I win.
There you go. Paul asks, do you prefer 5-man or 10-man sword bros, which actually is 11-man because remember they go to 11.
Yeah. I think they both have a play, honestly. A 5-man unit, you were actually saying it before, they trade up really well. If you run a 5-man squad, I would probably keep him bare bones or just put a cheap character in there. If you run an 11-man squad, that's what I was saying before. I think then it's worth to put an apothecary in there for sure, plus a second character, a captain or lieutenant. Lieutenant makes it more flexible to fall back and charge. A captain gives you the access to have all right, this turn I need to delete a target. You activate finest hours, and the captain can really help pushing through damage against that target.
Captain also
Yeah,
gives
And
you
you
that
get free strats. Let's not forget free strats. Yeah.
Yep, you can do fervent
Yeah,
twice
huge.
with the captain, which is pretty huge.
Yeah.
And for my answer to that question too is it depends on how many blobs and how big your blobs you want to be. And there's a practical side of this too. So if you bring really big, large blobs, you're gonna get chest clocked immediately. People are gonna look at that like, I'm gonna chest clock you. And so there's a lot of models to be moving. So if I wasn't bringing a full Crusader squad blob, I'd probably be going 11 sword bros. I do like the idea of at least having one very large large brick on the board. I think it just complements our gameplay style very well. But if I brought more than one, I think you kind of fall into that trap of having to deal with, so many models so quickly in a 3-hour game. That's where I think that that's the one thing I would just throw in there to consider.
That's
Yeah,
a good point.
yep. And
True.
one of the best things about the unit is they're so adaptable. You can do pretty much whatever you want with them, and because of their datasheet rules. So I think it's really going to be up to your preference on what you want to do. So I prefer MSU. So that's typically how I build my lists in general, and I feel like that's going to have a play in this edition as well. So I probably would be taking 5-man units myself, but there's play for the 10-man. Sascha said, you can buff them to astronomical levels, and it's viable. So it's really just what you want to do with them, with this particular unit especially, because they can do everything. So with that, thanks. I want to say thank you for tuning in today. Thank you, Sascha and David, for sticking around for 2 hours on your
absolutely.
Sunday and the 4th of July weekend. I know not a lot of people would do that, so thanks for stopping in.
Yeah,
No,
absolutely. We really appreciate you guys' insight. I think it helps a lot of our viewer base to hear from great tournament players like yourselves. People who've been there and done that and seen, what it's like and what works and what doesn't and that kind of stuff. So, really great to hear your insights on 10th edition. Thank you again for joining us. It's been a great stream today, I think.
Well, thanks for supporting the community.
Thank
You guys
you.
been doing a
Yeah,
fantastic job, so thank you.
absolutely. Awesome. Well, that's it for our stream today, guys. Don't forget to check out our Discord. We got a lot of great active folks in there. We have a really great Patreon with a lot of great benefits that you can do to help us out. If you need some Black Templar dice, we've got special implausible nature dice on baronofdice.com. You can use discount code IN40K to really get a nice little discount and help us out at the same time. See, Bob's got holding his up there right now. For our Patreon members, we've just gotten in our patron exclusive dice. They are awesome. I cannot wait to show these off to you guys. So check out our spaces for seeing those when we have some really nice photographer pictures. Paul just gave us a super chat. Thank you, Brothers Crusade On. Thank you for your
thank
support.
you.
And thank you, everyone watching, for your support as well. And until next time, keep on crusading, guys. Have a great weekend.
Ciao.